Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. And today's topic is probably one of my favorite ones for this season. It's going to be the second in our series of Inquiry in the Classroom. The topic is about inquiry in the social studies classroom, and I have asked a good friend of mine from my teaching days, Dr. Sarah Wiseman, who is a social studies teacher at Liberty High School in Frisco ISD. Thank you, Sarah, for coming on. We welcome you.
I'm so happy to be here. Inquiry is just my absolute favorite. So
great. That's awesome. So I'll actually just throw it back to you right now and just say, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a bit about your background, teaching. What do you enjoy most about it?
Yeah. So I got my bachelor's in social studies education at OU a gazillion years ago. And then I got my MED in curriculum and instruction at SMU. And just recently actually got my doctorate at SMU, Doctor of Liberal Studies. My dissertation was how social studies have been sidelined in Texas public schools and why it matters. And actually, there's a big section towards the end about what are some actionable items that teachers can do. And a big one is to use inquiry in the classroom. That's something that we can do to really make social studies more relevant and important and empower students who are not getting the social studies education, especially in primary school, that they should be getting.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that we're able to fit right in there for you. And so I will certainly give you that space to talk about it. What do you enjoy most about teaching?
Yeah. So I've been working in Frisco ISD my whole career, which is kind of crazy. This is my 18th year. And I've taught everything basically in the humanities space, grades 6 through 12. So I've taught middle school social studies and ILA, but for the last 11 years at Liberty, I've been teaching humanities. Right now, I'm also teaching AP Human Geography, but I've taught AP US History, African American Studies, AP World History, and on-level World History. So hopefully I don't end up teaching economics. That's not my favorite, but I guess I would have to if I wanted my bingo card blackout.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we talk about with social studies certification is that, I mean, you could technically teach anything that's underneath the sun right there.
Yeah, it's never boring.
Well, I'm glad that you've at least been able to err on the side of things that you're more passionate about. And I think that's one thing that we talk about with students is you may be able to teach that class, but a good school district will not force you to teach something that you're not, really into. So that's good.
Yeah. So, and that kind of relates to why I like teaching is I'm a very curious person. And so it's always fun to tackle a new content subject. And in social studies, kids are getting sort of the least recursive piece of their education because there's so many different disciplines. And so exciting that curiosity for the world, creating a passion for like lifelong learning. Those are the things I like about teaching.
No, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we all have a different version of that, right? We enjoy our subject matters so much that we'd love to see students engaging with it. And so I love to hear other teachers' aspect of that same sort of variation, right? Which is really, really cool. It's something that you just said. So like in the world that I live in, science and the Science Teachers Association, our tagline is discovering the world through science. And so you just simply said something very similar, right? Discovering the world through social studies. So that's really through the curiosity around that. That's really cool. Okay, so let's dive right into our topic. So inquiry-based learning, IBL, whatever it kind of comes up. What does that sort of mean to you? Because it can look differently for a lot of different teachers. So what does it mean to you, and what does it look like in your classes?
Yeah, so for me, inquiry-based learning is equipping students with critical thinking skills and how to make meaning in their world because they're going to encounter so much new information all throughout their lives, their careers, and in social studies also just as important as career as being a citizen. And so that's the whole point of it. And that can look really different depending on students' previous exposure to inquiry-based learning, what skills they already have, and also sort of the context of the classroom. Like my AP Human Geography classroom, kids in Frisco ISD don't take an advanced social studies at all in middle school. And then all of a sudden they're like dropped into an AP class in ninth grade. And it's a
Oh
bit of a
yeah.
shock. They don't have a lot of skills in social studies for that really advanced coursework. So we focus on inquiry as sort of a structured model that they're getting every day. So,
Okay.
and it pairs really well with Cornell Notes. So it's like each day, based on the reading, there's an essential question and sub questions that we work through. And they're putting the sub questions in the left-hand side of their Cornell Notes and taking notes from the activity, in that note space. And then that overarching question, that's what they're answering when they do their summary at the bottom.
Okay.
So it's really building like daily routines and skills for like, this is how you can think about hard things.
Do it through questioning, right? So you're thinking
Yeah.
about hard things by questioning those hard things. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So like last week we were looking at political structures. And so it was like internal political boundaries, like what is gerrymandering and how can gerrymandering affect outcomes? And so they're getting exposed to sort of that way to think about the world.
Oh yeah, cool.
And then humanities is a GT class for us. And so we sort of go through a larger range of what inquiry could look like. So we use a lot of like micro inquiries, visible thinking strategies from Harvard's Project Zero, which are these just sort of plug and play strategies. There's no training needed. Things like see, wonder, think, or values, identities, actions. When we encounter a new text or an image, something to get them thinking. And then we have like bigger, so like units. My co-teacher and I were talking about how we need to turn our Romeo and Juliet study into an inquiry. Like, why is this sort of the most popular romance in history?
That would be really interesting. And I feel like that would be way different than how either one of us probably experienced that in high school, right? I mean, like when I read Romeo and Juliet, it was let's read the book and talk about it. There wasn't necessarily any sort of structure around that questioning.
Exactly. And so we thought that would be fun entry point and the kids could really think about it from a literary context, because in humanities we have that English lens as well as and a world history context. How is this kind of capturing a moment? And then we also have them do independent inquiry. We support them through the research process once a semester. So, and it's really cool because that gives the kids a chance to take these skills that we've been working on and apply them in like areas of interest. So right now, sort of the broad question that they all have to answer is how are worldviews impacting culture, society, or governance in the world before 1450, which is like basically leaves almost anything open up to them. So you've got, a kid working on how Taoism is affecting poetry and doing poetry analysis. Another kid is working on like human sacrifice as a worldview and how that's impacting like the Mexica caste system. And then of course, like classic boys, like imperialism and the Roman Empire and how they're building like aqueducts. So
Nice.
it's a real range of types of things that they get to explore, which I love.
So with everyone doing such a different topic here, how do you manage the sort of messiness of inquiry? Like how do you, if students are going down rabbit holes that lead to unexpected directions, how do you get the students to still obtain the necessary content that you have to teach?
There's a couple of different ways. With research, one thing that we've really been emphasizing is that history is a social science. Because our school, the kids are very like STEM oriented and all of their inquiry skills, I feel like they've gotten already through science. And so trying to get them to apply that into history. So like, okay, you've written your research question, you've got a hypothesis, you're going out and gathering information, but you can't force the evidence into your thesis. Like a lot of times they're getting information. That's where the mess is they think that they're going to be able to find something and then it's not out there. And they're having to go back and go and actually truly do that research where they're rethinking where they thought it was going to take them. So that's a big thing. It's just kind of helping them see that mindset of how these skills are transferable. And then when it is in a unit, if possible, like when I taught African American studies, my students got really interested in a unit on on like police violence, which wasn't really something that I was intending, like the direction I was intending to go. But
Mhm.
I just went ahead and was like, okay, we can make this fit with the TEKS, we can make this fit with the unit and the inquiry. And I added that in because engagement is so important. You could
Yeah.
do it different ways, but the biggest thing is just time, coaching, being up on your feet, being around
Right.
the kids to help them when they hit that stuck spot.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of thinking in my own head. I mean, this is where the art of a teacher comes in, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you have to one know your content and know your standards well enough that whatever rabbit hole they go down, you can find a way to tie it back in, and then just being there to support the students through the process, right? I mean, I think that's really cool. So how do you sort of scaffold this process? I think you've already kind of talked a little bit about some of the things that you do on a daily basis, but to build that student proficiency and inquiry when this is not typically the normal method, especially in a social studies classroom, how do you go about building that proficiency?
So, I mean, we do like daily, the little thinking routines, the visible thinking routines are a big part of building those skills and going through stuff, the gradual release model. I do, we do, you do, going through those steps in class. We don't start research until second quarter, right? So, first quarter, we're doing that inquiry a lot more teacher led, a lot more
Mhm.
structured. So,
Okay,
that's part of it. Another big thing that we do is as a daily basis, a lot of this is like, you have to have good classroom management because if you
sure.
don't have that, then the kids are not engaged enough to be ready for research. So it's things like every single day we have turn and talk, and then we call the kids, but we don't just call the kids who have their hands raised. We have note cards where we call on them, cold calls, so they all know that they are expected to have an answer. And if
Mhm.
a kid doesn't have an answer, we just sit and wait uncomfortably with them. The wait time is really hard on
Yeah,
everybody, but it creates this culture of like engagement. You have to do it. um, and by having that classroom management where the kids are engaged in that teacher-led inquiry, then when it's time for student-led inquiry, they're in a lot more confident place to be
yeah.
able to ask for help, to be able to do it on their own.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, having high expectations and making sure that you don't that you apply those expectations uniformly, right? You don't let anyone get off the hook. Everyone is having to do the same thing. Yeah, I love that. So I'm going to circle back around and obviously I kind of just hit on this is not the normal way of doing social studies work, right? This is not what I went through, and again, probably not what you went through. So what
Definitely not.
caused what caused you to make the decision to teach your classes using inquiry based approach?
So it was sort of I was exposed first, and by being exposed to new strategies, I applied them and I saw that how good it was in my classroom. So like visible thinking, I saw in 2012 at a teacher conference. Go to your conferences. That's a good thing, especially for an early service teacher. And so I started using that. And then I had kind of been using principles of inquiry based learning, but I not as sort of a full blown model until I was a part of African American Studies curriculum writing back in 2021.
Mhm.
And so then I was exposed to the C3 model for inquiry based learning, which is from the National Council for Social Studies. They're like IBL projects specific to social studies. Fantastic resources, 10 out of 10 recommend. And we wrote all of our African American studies as a thematic inquiry. And so every unit covered a broad span of time, but
Mhm.
had this sort of driving question. And that was such a game changer for me. And so that's when I started adopting it sort of really regularly in my classroom.
That's great. I mean, I love the plug for professional development, right? If a teacher is not continuing to learn, then they're going to stay stagnant and they're not going to move, in any great direction in their classroom. I feel like if I hadn't been going to my teacher professional development, my conferences, I would have missed out on so many cool things that I eventually got to do. So that I love that plug. And since you're talking about questions, that actually leads right into my next one, which is that social studies is often about asking those compelling questions. So, could you walk us through an example of one of those questions that you've used in your class and how it drove that entire unit of inquiry?
Yeah. So probably my favorite was the one I referenced earlier, where the kids ended up taking me on this bird walk into like police violence.
Hmm.
And the question for the whole unit was, who's guaranteeing justice, the
Hmm.
government or people? And so it really took us through some super interesting and seemingly disparate topics. Things like, why would African Americans fight for freedom abroad while they were facing injustice at home? And we talked about, like the Harlem Hellfighters and the Tuskegee Airmen and the 6888 Postal Battalion. Um, and then, like, what did justice look like in Jim Crow America and who's guaranteeing it? And it's looking at the interplay between the NAACP and presidents in the early 20th century, from President Wilson, who's screening Birth of a Nation, which is super racist in the White House, to eventually Truman, who desegregates the armed forces. Is it ever too late for justice? So we looked at like Emmett Till and Mamie Till and how she turned Emmett's brutal death into a huge turning point for the civil rights movement. And then at the end, they got to engage in their own independent research, who's guaranteeing justice. And they look at civil rights legislation and court cases and who are the driving forces behind that and what then came of those different decisions. So it was really powerful. And it was around the Emmett Till part where we started looking at police brutality as well.
How do you handle those situations where an open inquiry approach allows for discussions involving controversial or difficult topics such as historical injustices?
To allow for that important skill of dealing with hard things, that's what they're going to have to do in class. It's really important to have your classroom norms set up for the beginning of the school year.
Hmm.
So we do at Liberty, we do treatment agreements. And so we've got
Yeah.
our honor code, spells out Hawks. Almost every school has one of those. And we go
Right.
through and really talk about what's that look like, teacher to student, student to student, student to teacher, and revisit that. So that's an important thing. It's just having that level of trust and respect that's foundational to your classroom. And then we teach the kids that all arguments need to be based on observable facts, really taking that scientific approach. You can't just say something because it feels right, but
Hmm.
that you need to look at that. And then we're exposing students to a wide variety of different perspectives. So, for example, with the police brutality, we also looked at like some different things from African American police organizations, places where police officers have done good for the community, different models
Hmm.
like that. And getting that variety of perspectives is really important to keep it from becoming just a polarized discussion.
If we're thinking about analyzing biases and perspectives, I know one of the big things around social studies is the source of information, right? So, how does an inquiry based approach sort of enable students to critically evaluate the sources that the information is coming from?
It's the best for that. There's actually a couple of routines in particular that I really, really like. There's one from Facing History and Ourselves, another plug for an amazing resource for social studies teachers, especially if you're having to deal with hard topics.
Mhm.
That's kind of what they specialize in. They have one called Head, Heart, Conscience. So it's like head, which is more that like academic, what are you observing, what can you see going on with the situation. Heart is like, how does that make you feel, engaging with that SEL aspect. And then conscience, this idea of like, what are you driven to do for justice based on that. Another really good one is again from Visible Thinking Project Zero. So values, identities, actions is one I use at least 3 or 4 times a quarter. Values is like, what values does this make you think about? Identities, like who's the author, who are they speaking to, who are they speaking about, who isn't like having their voice heard, which is a
Mhm.
really important question in social studies, like who's being left out of the conversation.
Right.
um, and then actions, like what actions are you being driven towards by this, what actions are being encouraged. And that helps students sort of see that everything has a purpose, nothing is neutral, not even the textbook.
I mean, that's true. Yeah, especially you have to critically sort of evaluate where the textbooks are coming from and who they're marketing to. I know that in science, in terms of textbooks coming to Texas, are written for Texas, and how that might look differently from, say, New York or California. So I
It's
didn't.
about to get really different for social studies in Texas, man.
Yeah, well, I lived through the last standards revision for science. That was a few years ago, and got to see that process from the other side. It was interesting. It was really interesting. So yeah, I feel for y'all.
But that's the nice thing about inquiry is in this really charged climate around education, in particular social studies education, in inquiry, you're giving your kids multiple perspectives, you're asking questions, they're coming to the conclusions. And so that really, as long as what you're doing is in the TEKS, you're very protected if you're using an inquiry model versus if you're direct teaching, you're telling them what you think.
That's
And that
true.
comes with some risks.
Yeah, I could see that. So if you're thinking about sort of your teaching career pre-inquiry versus like where it is now, where do you see kind of the biggest shifts in your teaching, or where do you see the biggest benefits from your students comparing those two times?
That's a hard question to answer because I feel like I came to inquiry over a long process.
Okay, yeah.
Really, especially adding those inquiry. And I think it's something that I was doing without knowing that it was what I was doing. But
Oh yeah, sure.
I will say that the biggest thing is kids are more interested and engaged. I feel like I'm giving them what they really need to go on into their lives and be critical thinkers, whether it's at their jobs or in their communities as citizens. So I just feel like what I'm doing, the project of teaching them, has been a lot more successful. The more and more inquiry I've built into my curriculum.
That's great. I mean, that's certainly like if you're a new teacher coming into the field, this is not something you do. You can't do all of this in year one, right? You pick it up a little bit as you go. So if a teacher is looking to get started, like what is maybe one thing that they could do in their classroom to get started on the journey of doing more inquiry?
I would say using those little microbites of inquiry with thinking routines from visible thinking. There's a few of them that I really have relied on over the years: See, Wonder, Think, Parts, Purposes, Complexities, Connect, Extend, Challenge, which is like KWL, but way better than KWL. um, and so those little bites of thinking routines really help the kids know how to think, and they are so easy to integrate into your classroom. So that's where I would start. And then from there, check out some frameworks like the C3 framework. So, and the nice thing about these little inquiry bites, the little thinking routines, is that the students, if you use them enough, if you forget to give them one, they'll be like, oh, should I see, wonder, think? And you're like, oh, yes, that is
Yes.
actually what we should be doing. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I love
So,
it when the students call you out on like, "Hey, shouldn't we be doing this particular process?" That's great. So I'll see if we can get some of those bits of information, links to different resources, and I'll tag them in this podcast episode as well. So thank you
for
for that.
sure.
If listeners want to learn more, maybe about your journey specifically in inquiry learning, or just more information about inquiry-based learning and social studies, where can they find it online or elsewhere?
So my journey would be, if you want to follow me, I'm at Wiseman Teaches on X, and then I'm at Dr. Wiseman Teaches on Instagram and Threads. I will say though, especially between getting my doctorate and just the climate, I haven't been as active on those platforms as I was even like 5 years ago. And then just go, search up Visible Thinking, Harvard Project Zero. They have a just huge amount of free resources for those small little inquiries. And then also C3 Inquiry has a huge bank of stuff that's free and available online. There's also a good book that is totally worth the money that they publish. So it's got some like, how do you really go through and structure an inquiry from start to finish?
And that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Dr. Wiseman, for being a guest today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.